For over a decade. He's a professor out of Columbia University. He says he defines them as the everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely on their marginalized group membership. Do you need me to read that again?
Yeah.
Right, okay. The everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, and insults, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely on their marginalized group membership. So this morning what we've got for you is a series of slides that people have written up on a little board that says something that's been said to them. We're going to pause between each one. I apologize if this hurts anyone, but I think it's important for people to see these because chances are many of us, if not all of us, may have done one or more of these in our lifetime or have experienced one or more of these. And it can be any marginalized group. Afterwards, we'll have a meditation. So take a deep breath and let's begin. Some of them may be difficult to read.
Okay. They can't see. I saw someone say, oh, some people can't see this. I spoke to those who can't read it, and they were okay. We were worried about actually reading them out loud, that might cause more harm. So we checked in with those who couldn't read. So take some deep breaths. As Unitarian Universalists, we want everyone to be part of the circle. We work to draw the circle wide. Sometimes that means that we have to examine our own behavior and where we can be better. So for this morning, for our meditation, I invite you to consider your own experience with microaggressions, whether it's having experienced them toward yourself or you actually doing one of them. Reflect on that experience, whichever it may be.
you, but I've put my foot in my mouth before. Matter of fact, it happened to me in my very first week on the job here. Some of you might know David Nunez. He's the sexton, which is of the church, who's sort of the janitorial caretaker. If you're here early or late before church or after church, you'll see him and his family are here to sort of take things down and put them back up and all that sort of thing. Now, David is of Latino descent, and I'm not from around here, but I was talking with him and I noticed that he had a little bit of an accent. So I said, "Where are you from?" I remember he looks at me kind of oddly, and he said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, your accent, where are you from?" And he said, "East LA." Oh. Have you ever put your foot in your mouth? Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. But this is the world that I walk through, right? I'm a white, highly educated woman. I never met anybody from East LA. I don't know the accent, but my assumption is that if someone who doesn't sound like me or look like me, then they must not be from here. Do you hear the subtle insult in that assumption? Right? What do they say about assuming things, right? Now, in no way was that meant to be an insult. It was a genuine inquiry and wanting to get to know him better. And yet, impact can be different from intent. I immediately apologized to David. I didn't make excuses. I said, "I'm sorry, that was really ignorant of me." Smile. He brushed it off. It would have been really easy to simply get defensive, to maybe not say anything. "Oh, okay." Or, "I'm not a racist, really." And I'm not, really, not intentionally. I don't want to be a racist, but the reality is I live in this white world, and I can't help but be, to a certain extent, sometimes that way, unintentional or not. I have these biases. They're unconscious. I think it's important that we deal often first with impact rather than with intent, right? You know, we often say, assume the best intentions. I'm sure David did. Assume the best intentions when someone says something that we don't like. And in general, I think that's a good rule to live by. I try to live by that rule. But it's also a really condescending thing to say to someone who experiences microaggressions every day. Because often there are oppressive undertones to microaggressions, even subconsciously. To ask someone to assume best of intentions after they have felt insulted is a bit like saying, "Oh, don't be so sensitive." A person becomes sensitive because their soul is continually bruised by these microaggressions. And whatever someone's intentions might have been, the impact of their words is painful, it's hurtful, and it's real. We've all got these unintended biases. That's what I think of as my racism and my homophobia, my transphobia, ableism. They're unintended biases. They're not conscious. I don't want to have them, and I'm working on getting rid of them. But we all have that. As a matter of fact, there's this really famous study going on right now at Harvard called Project Implicit. Catherine Martin, I'm grateful that she sent this to me, this link to me. And it's a test to see if you have any biases towards certain groups of people. Now, and it's all over there. It can be sexual orientation, it can be elderly, it can be politics, you name it. Where are your biases? And it's fascinating how they do it. They flash pictures at you and you have to respond quickly. And they time you on how quickly you respond. It's fascinating. One of the things I find very amusing about it is that the very first thing they have this sort of disclaimer in the very beginning. It says, "You may not be happy with the results of this." Yeah. And you can learn about your own biases, which is interesting because I did find that I have a slight biases against race. But I have a slight bias towards gay people, which is kind of interesting. Now, I don't want to have a biases at all. I want to treat people as they are. So how do we get rid of these biases if we don't want them? So here's what I've come up with, because I think you've heard me preach on this. Basically, you know, the main thing is that you've got to encounter other people that are different from who you are, right? Experience, right? I didn't know an East LA accent. I didn't. I need to get out more. right? And to be open and curious about people that are different from yourself. We counter ignorance with experience. The second thing is to understand the impact of our words, that words matter. Now, we need to think sometimes about what it is that we're saying rather than just blurting it out, right? Now, some people go, oh, that's curtailing freedom of speech. You know, I should be able to say, what, I have to watch everything I say now? You can say whatever you want, but why would you want to say something that could potentially be hurtful? We Unitarian Universalists, we value the dignity and worth of every person. We want to create a world that everyone feels safe, who feels loved and belong. And words matter. They help tell someone whether or not they belong. It's a long road to creating that circle wider and wider, and we're going to make mistakes. In fact, there was a huge mistake made in the news earlier this week. Many of you may remember this. A tweet from our president. He used the word lynching as a way to describe how he feels he is being treated in the press over recent allegations of the impeachment trial. Now, here's the thing. We all know what he means, right? He knows he feels persecuted. We know it's hyperbole, right? We use hyperbole a lot. Oh, that dog is so cute, it just kills me. We know that it's a metaphor, and yet for millions of people, that word has a very specific meaning and is filled with racist bigotry and a history of terror that has never been fully acknowledged in this country. To have it used by a wealthy, privileged white person in the highest position of power in the nation, if not the entire world, is beyond inappropriate. Now, I noticed that the pundits were quick to point out that many people have said this. We do make mistakes. Some people will apologize for those mistakes. And some people we do put our foot in our mouth and we say something inappropriate. I'm willing to bet that most of us here have at some point unintentionally, hopefully, without malice, have put their foot in their mouth and have hurt other people. The question is, do we learn from those mistakes, or do we double down in our defensiveness telling us, oh, you're just being too sensitive? Or in that case, oh, that person did it too. Can we have a higher standard? This brings me to the third. This gets to the idea of the apology. I learned this actually from our Unitarian Universalist youth groups. It's called ouch, oops. When you hurt someone and they say ouch in whatever form that may be, and it might even be a look like I got from David. What do you mean? You say, oops, I apologize. You don't have to make a big deal out of it, but first always acknowledge the impact. And not go immediately to, oh, I didn't mean, say, oh, I'm sorry. I realized how that sounded. That was wrong with me. We live in an age right now that is quite frankly very sensitive, and for very good reason. Mainly because the white culture still hasn't learned enough about the ways that we have oppressed other cultures. And people are tired of it. Their souls have been bruised for far too long. So you have the Me Too movement, you have the Black Lives Matter movement, Latinx movements, ableist movements. Some that feel like we're afraid to open our mouths in case we put our foot in it. And given the history in this country, I think perhaps pausing before we open our mouths might be a good thing. Now, microaggression comes in all kinds of forms, and not all of them are verbal. And that leads me into this thing called cultural misappropriation. This is another subtle form of oppression, of bias. This is a picture of a Victoria's Secret model in full Indian headdress. Simply understood, cultural misappropriation is when one culture adopts the forms of another culture, but it's more than that. The misappropriation part of it is really when there's a power dynamic involved. It's when a dominant culture takes over the cultural aspects of an oppressed people without regard to any of the understanding of the history, its sacredness, or impact of what that might have. Cultural misappropriation is a bit like saying my dominant culture will, like in history, just take whatever it wants and leave what I don't want. Now this has been happening throughout history, right? Colonialism is rampant with examples. I mean, if you just think about Christianity alone, right? Think of the pagan holidays. They took over solstice. They took over Easter with Easter bunnies, or that sort of thing. And we live with those today. But make no mistake, it was a form of oppression. It's a way of controlling an oppressed culture. Now, some people get very defensive, and you can tell when you're defensive when your voice goes up about 5 octaves when you talk about cultural misappropriation. And I hear examples that go to that extreme. Well, can we just not eat Mexican food then because we're not Mexican? Or if it's only if it's made by real Mexicans. Should we not wear a sari at the beach because we're not East Indian? Oh my gosh, where does it end? The sky is falling. Now, there is a challenge with this. The point is, who gets to decide what is appropriate or not? Because the problem is that cultural misappropriation exists kind of on a spectrum, right? We know when something is completely inappropriate, like a Victoria's Secret model wearing a headdress on a runway. But eating Mexican food, I'm not sure that's entirely inappropriate. It's part of our culture. It's part of who we are now. Everybody eats it. Is that okay? The problem is that there are some things that seem very obvious and some that don't, and the rest of it is in this huge gray area. And as a matter of fact, this church is right in the middle of that gray area right now. Okay? Because next Saturday, we have our Dia de los Muertos fall auction. Okay? And that was the theme that was chosen for it, the Dia de los Muertos. Now, is this cultural misappropriation?
Yes.
We are a predominantly, but not exclusively, a white, non-Christian denomination. Is it appropriate for us to be using a holiday sacred to many of Mexican, in particular Mexican, but Christian Catholic descent, and using the holiday to help us raise money? Okay? Now this conversation came up with the auction committee because someone very courageously asked that question, is it appropriate? And questions are good. We should never be afraid to ask or to answer good questions. In fact, there are great questions to ask yourself. Is this appropriate or not? So here's some questions that you can ask. So one, what is the motivation for the cultural borrowing? Now the auction committee had a couple of motivations. First, they knew that our auction fell on this specific holiday. It is happening this weekend. And so they thought it would sort of fit in well. Let's adopt what's going on in our community. And second, they wanted a fun theme. The more fun people have, the better that we can raise some money, right? I mean, that's part of it. We want to have something fun and festive. And the Dia de los Muertos is an incredibly festive holiday, if you weren't aware. The idea about being our ancestors that are here to party with us on this day. That's the idea behind it. It's not a sad holiday at all. So wanting to use a holiday to make money is not the highest of motivations, but after talking with them, they also saw it as an opportunity to learn more and to teach us more about this. Okay? So two, how do the owners of the tradition feel about pieces of the tradition being borrowed? Now here they had done some due diligence. They spoke to some of the people here in the congregation who are of Mexican or Hispanic descent to see how they felt. And they also called the Santa Ana Dia de los Muertos festival people and asked them, how do you feel about us doing it? And everybody gave a thumbs up that they spoke with. Now I know that not everyone is going to agree, because who gets to be an owner, right? I know that there are people who will disagree. We have to weigh all of that when we make decisions. Who in our community would or would not like it? How are we understanding what our impact may be? Are we willing to listen to those who may be upset? Can we acknowledge impact before intent? The third thing is to ask, how much do we know about this particular tradition? What do I know of the history and experience of the people from whom I am borrowing? Honestly, I think many of the members didn't know a lot about Dia de los Muertos when they first started down this path, but they've learned a lot since then. They've learned about how the origins of this particular tradition actually comes out of the Aztecs, about the indigenous peoples of southern Mexico. It was actually co-opted then by the Catholic Church, like Christianity did with the pagans, right? And while it was mostly a southern Mexican thing, it's now become a national Mexican thing, and other Hispanic communities in Central and North America and South America have adopted this. And they learned about things called ofrendas and the belief systems that are involved. So we're going deeper. We're learning more about these things, right? Number 4, is this borrowing, distorting, watering down, or misinterpreting the tradition? Again, it's not so easy to decide, because originally, as I said, this was an Aztec tradition of the indigenous people of southern Mexico. The belief was that so long as people were remembered, they came back once a year to party with their descendants. Okay. Now, when the Catholics came in, they kind of co-opted that. They believe people go to heaven. They don't have a problem with people coming back and partying for the day, but in the Aztec tradition, if you stop remembering your ancestors, they go away. That's not the Catholic tradition. So in this modern world, like in the Santa Ana Festival and everything, people have created altares, or ofrendas as they're called, even to social justice causes like AIDS and immigration. They do this as a way to draw attention to that which they hold as holy and sacred. Now, Santa Ana also holds an ofrenda competition each year, and these altars can be incredibly elaborate, involving candles and the beautiful marigolds that are part of the Aztec tradition, pictures and the skulls that many of you are very aware of. Now, the auction committee had originally thought to do something similar, but after our conversation, they realized, ooh, that's too far to the inappropriate line, right? Instead, they're inviting everyone to do something more of also what they do here in Santa Ana is have a communal ofrenda. To bring a picture of someone that you love that you would like to honor. In doing so, honoring the spirit of that festival. Now, what do you think? Does this fall on cultural misappropriation or borrowing? I struggle with this topic. I struggle with it a lot. And I know that our auction committee are too, but they're really using this as an opportunity. Because on the one hand, I completely understand why marginalized groups would like to have control over their culture that has long been oppressed, right? You can understand that. And while our Unitarian Universalist churches are predominantly white, they're not exclusively so. And if we're going to change that, if we're going to try to be the beloved community that we want to be, we need to invite in other perspectives and traditions mindfully and respectfully. So I see this as an opportunity, first to start a conversation about cultural misappropriation, which, by the way, the auction committee took really well. Like, they really listened and understood. And we do have that's chaired by the Ibanez family as well. Just want to mention that as well, as in terms of being as ownership. They listened, they asked questions, and they made changes based on that conversation. And I think second, it's an opportunity to go deeper, to learn more about this culture that is all around us here in Orange County. To have experiences, right? So that we can get beyond our biases to help us understand what's going on here. And I encourage all of you to go to that Santa Ana Festival before the auction on Saturday and check it out for yourselves. I'm going to be going. I think it'll be loads of fun. I've heard it's incredible, and it's free. They literally want everyone to be there. They want people to learn and to be a part of it. So how do we navigate all of this, right? Microaggressions, cultural misappropriation. It isn't always going to be about who's right or wrong. We're not always going to agree. Not everyone is. But I do think it's about how we treat one another when we have the conversation. Here's our wonderful That's the festival's brochure. But we need to, can we please just have this conversation, because words do matter, and listening matters, and growing and understanding matters. It's how we build the beloved community. How do we navigate all of this with as much love as possible? We're all in this together. We live in a multicultural world, an interdependent world. Our cultures are going to overlap, bump up against one another. They're going to incorporate change, that's what cultures do, but we need to do so mindfully, respectfully, not oppressively. If we err on the side of not exploring, of not asking the questions, then we don't grow. If we err on the side of blindly going about our day without regard to how we might hurt people or misuse a culture, then we continue a history of oppression. So let's move forward carefully, respectfully, and courageously. Hold hands with me, forgive with me, make mistakes with me, and take a chance with me. Be whole with me, be real with me, start to heal with me, so that we can live courageously. Let us sing.